Yes, we absolutely are. And I am here to tell you and everybody listening the story of Sammy the Sounder's casket. So, as always, sources for this episode, there is a wonderful YouTube video by Alexander E. Tennant called Portland Timbers Army Coffin Saga, about a 5-minute video. If you really want to learn about this incident and see live video of everything that led up to it and everything that I'm talking about, definitely check it out. Highly recommend it. Also, was able to take some info from an article called What is a Seattle Freakin' Sounder? The Origins of MLS Cup Finalist Nickname by Ari Lillenwall. Hopefully, I didn't mispronounce that. Of MLS Soccer. And then Wikipedia, of course. All right. So there's going to be a lot of history within the history of this episode because with no context for any fans outside of Portland and Seattle fan bases, fans carrying a casket with an inflatable whale into the stadium sounds like one of the most ridiculous, confusing stories. So let's start with the groundwork, the rivalry between Seattle and Portland. And I'm going to keep this relatively high level. The history begins all the way back in the 70s and 80s with both sides participating in NASL. The rivalry, like many other rivalries, has been sparked by the proximity between the two cities. With that said, however, I believe that soccer is the last remaining current day sports rivalry between the two cities. After the end of the NASL era, there was a hiatus for over a decade before the rivalry was reborn again in the A League in 2001. Their A League battles would last for 4 seasons, ending in 2004 with a playoff battle between the two sides that would see Seattle getting the better of Portland in extra time. Following 2004, the rivalry would continue under the newly named USL First Division. To this point, Seattle had the slight edge in the head-to-head results with 11 wins to Portland's 8. Along with the beginning of the USL First Division was the first meeting in the US Open Cup, now adding another competition to this rivalry's history. The start of the USL era was strong for Portland as they won 3 of the first 4 meetings, including the inaugural US Open Cup matchup. Seattle would bounce back in the coming years to solidify relatively significant head-to-head advantage over Portland with 20 wins to Portland's 13. The USL era rivalry between the two sides would end in 2008, with Seattle making their move to MLS in 2009. As Portland was lined up to also join MLS soon after Seattle's move, there were still many more rivalry matchups to look forward to. However, at the time, nobody knew for sure, which meant the match we're talking about today could be the last between this historic rivalry. That brings us to the USL match on August 7th, 2008 at PGE Park between Portland and Seattle. So as previously mentioned, with Seattle's move to MLS, fans were unsure if this would be the last match between the two sides. So Portland's fans, specifically the Portland Timbers Army, wanted to do something memorable in case it was the last meeting. In the YouTube video mentioned at the start, there's an interview with a member of the Timbers Army who tells the story of the Casket. He starts off by talking about the recreational league team that the Timbers Army is a part of. And while they were practicing one day, they heard a scraping sound coming from nearby. When they looked in the direction of the sound, they found that the sound was actually coming from some people dragging a casket to the curb. What a perfect opportunity to represent the potential death of the Timbers Sounders rivalry than with a casket. He says that a couple members of the Timbers Army ran over to the casket, which said, "Free casket, no body inside." So, with the opportunity sitting right in front of them, they loaded the casket into someone's pickup truck, and the preparations were on their way. On August 7th, the casket was brought to a pub near the stadium, where people signed the casket and a candle vigil was performed. As the title of the story says, the casket was not empty. The Timbers Army had blown up an inflatable whale to put in the casket as a representation of Sammy the Sounder. All right, time for brief history lesson number 2. For those outside of Portland or Seattle, you may have no idea who Sammy the Sounder is and why an inflatable whale was used to represent them. The Sounder's part of the name comes from the nearby Puget Sound. One of the animals that is a part of the marine life in the Puget Sound is the orca, or killer whale. This was the reason that the Sounders' mascot during their USL days became an orca named Sammy, hence the birth of Sammy the Sounder. The Timbers Army represented the potential death of the rivalry by placing an inflatable whale in the casket to reference Sammy the Sounder and, by and large, the Seattle Sounders. Second brief history lesson done. Let's get back to the funeral. A funeral indeed was, as when it was getting time to head to the stadium, the Timbers Army carried the casket from the pub to the stadium with bagpipes being played along the march. This would never happen nowadays, but when the Timbers Army reached the stadium, they hoisted the casket over the fence to further members on the other side to successfully bring the casket into the stadium. Security eventually appears to finally usher the casket out of the stadium, but that's not before a Reddit post by Sean Levy many years later. Remembering the events shows a picture of the casket being crowd surfed to the capo stand in the north end. The Sounders would get the last laugh in this one, as Sebastian Latu's 20th minute goal gave the Sounders a 1-0 win. Luckily for Portland fans, and quite frankly, luckily for us MLS fans as well, this was not the death of the rivalry, as Portland would join MLS not long after Seattle, which has treated us to many more renditions of this great rivalry.